In this episode, we're going to take the mystery out of who attacks organizations and replace it with a calm, structured way to think about threat actors and what they are likely to do next. When you are brand new to cybersecurity, it is easy to imagine attackers as a single blurry category called hackers, and that mental model makes everything feel unpredictable. Strategy becomes possible only when you can separate different kinds of adversaries, understand what they want, and recognize the patterns that guide their behavior. That is what profiling is for, and it is not about trying to guess a specific person's name or personality. It is about building a practical picture of motives, capabilities, constraints, and preferred approaches, so your decisions are grounded in realistic expectations. As you build that picture, you also learn how to anticipate next moves, which is simply the habit of asking what an attacker would do after they succeed at one step or fail at another. This skill matters for GIC strategic planning, policy, and leadership, GSTRT, because strategic security is not only about controls, it is about making defensible choices based on plausible threats. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A threat actor profile starts with motive, because motive shapes almost everything else. Some threat actors want money, which means they gravitate toward actions that can produce cash quickly, like stealing payment data, committing fraud, or extorting an organization. Some want access, such as competitors seeking intellectual property or groups seeking strategic advantage, which may lead to quiet, persistent efforts rather than noisy disruption. Some want disruption, such as groups motivated by ideology or conflict, where causing downtime or public embarrassment is the goal. Others may be insiders, where the motive can include resentment, opportunism, or even accidental harm caused by misunderstanding and poor judgment. Beginners often assume every attacker wants the same thing, but motive is the fastest way to narrow the field and predict behavior. If money is the motive, you should expect speed, repeatable methods, and an interest in systems connected to financial outcomes. If long-term access is the motive, you should expect patience, careful movement, and attempts to blend in. Once motive is clearer, the next piece is capability, which is the realistic level of skill and resources the threat actor can bring. Capability includes technical skill, time, money, access to tools, and the ability to coordinate, and it is not the same as intelligence or creativity. Many successful attacks come from threat actors who are not brilliant, but who are persistent and good at exploiting common weaknesses. A high-capability actor might develop custom techniques, find subtle weaknesses, or maintain stealth over long periods. A lower-capability actor might rely on widely available malware, simple phishing, and easy misconfigurations. This matters because anticipating next moves depends on what the actor can realistically do if their first attempt fails. A low-capability actor may simply try a different victim or repeat the same approach until they get lucky, while a high-capability actor may adapt and change tactics quickly. Strategic security uses this distinction to avoid overreacting to every threat as if it were the most advanced adversary on Earth. Constraints are just as important as capabilities, because constraints explain why threat actors do not do everything they could do. Constraints include time pressure, fear of detection, limited access, limited knowledge of the environment, and the need to stay profitable. For example, financially motivated groups often behave like businesses because they need repeatable success, and they do not want to waste effort on targets that are too hard. That constraint can lead them toward the easiest entry points and the highest payoff assets. A group trying to maintain long-term access is constrained by stealth, because being noticed ends the mission. An insider is constrained by their position and access level, which can be powerful in one area, but limited in another. Understanding constraints helps you anticipate next moves because it reveals what is likely and what is unlikely. If an attacker is constrained by time, you should expect quick escalation and monetization attempts. If they are constrained by stealth, you should expect careful privilege changes and quiet data access rather than loud disruption. A practical profile also includes the threat actor's typical playbook, which is the sequence of moves they tend to use to reach goals. A common way to describe these patterns is through tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTP, which is simply a structured way of talking about what attackers try to accomplish, how they do it, and the repeatable steps they follow. You do not need to memorize deep technical details to use this strategically. At a high level, many playbooks begin with gaining initial access, then establishing persistence, then escalating privileges, then moving to more valuable systems, then achieving the end goal, such as theft, fraud, or disruption. The key is to recognize that an attacker's moves are rarely random because they are following paths that have worked before. When you understand the playbook, you can anticipate what comes next after you observe a clue, such as a suspicious login or unusual access request. Strategy uses these patterns to decide where guardrails should be strongest and where monitoring should be most attentive. Initial access is worth special attention because it is where many attack stories begin, and it is often the most misunderstood by beginners. People sometimes imagine that attackers start by smashing through a firewall, but in reality, many attacks start with normal-looking access methods that exploit human behavior or weak identity practices. Social engineering, password reuse, and misconfigurations that expose services can give attackers a foothold that looks like a regular user. From a strategic viewpoint, this makes identity and access decisions central because a lot of modern threat activity is really about abusing trust rather than breaking encryption. If you expect financially motivated actors, anticipate phishing-like approaches and credential theft attempts, because those scale well and work often. If you expect insiders, anticipate misuse of legitimate access, because insiders do not need to break in. Anticipating next moves here means asking what the attacker can do with a small foothold, such as seeking broader access, looking for sensitive data locations, or testing which actions trigger detection. After initial access, many threat actors try to increase their power because power opens doors to higher value assets. This is where privilege becomes a strategic concept, not just a technical one. Privilege means the ability to do things other users cannot do, such as changing configurations, reading sensitive data, or creating new accounts. Attackers seek privilege because it reduces friction, lets them move faster, and makes it harder to remove them completely. A beginner might assume that once an attacker gets in, the damage is immediate, but many attacks involve a period of exploration and gradual escalation. Anticipating next moves means recognizing that a small access event can be a precursor to bigger actions like account changes, unusual permission requests, or attempts to access administrative functions. This also connects to why governance matters, because clear rules about who can grant privilege and how that is reviewed can slow down or stop escalation. Strategic security focuses on limiting the blast radius of compromised accounts rather than assuming compromise never happens. Movement inside an environment is another step that becomes predictable once you think in terms of goals and constraints. Attackers move because their first foothold is rarely on the system that holds the most value. They may start on a user account but want access to data stores, financial systems, or management platforms. This movement can be quiet or loud depending on the threat actor's motive and capability, and your anticipation should reflect that. A high-capability actor seeking long-term access may move slowly, using legitimate tools and cautious steps to avoid detection. A lower-capability actor may use noisy scanning and brute approaches because they care more about speed than stealth. Strategic decisions here include segmentation, least privilege, and visibility. But even without technical implementation details, you can understand the goal. Make it hard for a small compromise to become a large compromise. When you anticipate next moves, you look for the logic of progression, such as attempts to access systems that are closer to money, sensitive data, or control. End goals are where threat actor profiles become most useful for executives, because end goals translate directly into business impact. A financially motivated group may end with ransomware, extortion, or theft that leads to fraud. A competitor-motivated actor may end with theft of designs, customer lists, or strategic plans. A disruption-focused actor may end with downtime, defacement, or public embarrassment. An insider may end with sabotage, theft, or accidental exposure due to poor handling. Anticipating next moves means that when you see early activity, you ask which end goal fits the pattern and what preparatory steps would likely precede it. For ransomware and extortion, You often expect both access and the ability to disrupt recovery, which makes backups and recovery readiness central to strategy. For data theft, you expect collection and transfer of sensitive information, which makes data access controls and detection important. For disruption, you expect targeting of availability and high-visibility systems, which makes resilience and communication readiness part of strategic planning. A major beginner misunderstanding is thinking that threat actor profiling is only about external attackers, when internal behavior can be just as important. Insiders can be malicious, careless, or compromised, and the same event can look similar on the surface. A compromised insider account may behave like a malicious actor, while a careless insider may create exposure that an external actor later exploits. Profiling insiders involves understanding role-based access, normal workflows, and the pressures that lead to shortcuts. It also involves understanding that most insiders are not villains, and that strategy should focus on reducing opportunity for harm while making safe behavior easy. Anticipating next moves in insider scenarios often means anticipating what someone can do with legitimate access, such as exporting data, changing records, or granting permissions. That is why accountability and review are strategic concepts, because they create friction for harmful actions without punishing normal work. Strategic security uses profiling to design guardrails that address both intent and accident. Another critical aspect of anticipating next moves is recognizing that threat actors respond to friction, and the friction you create shapes their choices. If you make initial access harder, some actors will move on to easier targets, while others will try alternative paths. If you limit privilege escalation, attackers may attempt social engineering to gain higher access through persuasion rather than exploitation. If you strengthen detection, stealth-focused actors may slow down, while speed-focused actors may become noisier and more destructive. This is why strategy is not just defense, it is influence, because your environment influences attacker behavior by changing cost, risk, and probability of success. A good profile helps you predict which actors are most likely to be deterred and which are likely to adapt. It also helps you prioritize investments that raise attacker cost in the areas most connected to your business value drivers. On an exam that emphasizes strategy, the best answer often reflects this idea of shaping behavior rather than only reacting. Threat actor profiling also has a governance side, because profiles must be used responsibly and updated as reality changes. Profiles are not stereotypes, and they should not be treated as permanent labels that ignore evidence. The purpose is to guide decisions under uncertainty, not to claim certainty about the future. A strong strategic approach uses profiles as hypotheses and then looks for signals that confirm or challenge them, such as changes in incident patterns, new business exposure, or shifts in the broader threat landscape. This is also where communication becomes important, because different stakeholders may interpret the same threat differently. Technical teams may focus on mechanisms, while executives focus on impact, and profiling helps bridge that gap by providing a shared story about who might attack, what they want, and what they would likely do next. When the organization shares that story, priorities become easier to justify and funding becomes easier to defend. That is why profiling belongs in strategy, not as a technical curiosity, but as a decision tool. To make anticipation practical, you can think in terms of branching paths, where each observed event suggests a small set of plausible next steps. If you observe suspicious access attempts, a plausible next step is trying different accounts, seeking higher privilege, or targeting systems that hold sensitive information. If you observe unusual data access, plausible next steps include collection of more data, attempts to export it, or efforts to cover tracks. If you observe disruption in one system, plausible next steps include expanding disruption to related systems, targeting recovery capabilities, or using the disruption as leverage for extortion. This kind of branching is not about building a complex prediction engine. It is about avoiding surprise by having a mental list of what comes next in a typical playbook. It also helps you prioritize response, because you can focus on the actions that block the next step rather than only cleaning up the last one. Strategic thinking is often the difference between reacting to symptoms and interrupting the attacker's plan. As we close, the central idea is that profiling threat actors and anticipating their next strategic moves is a way to turn uncertainty into structured reasoning. You start with motive because motive shapes what the actor values. Then you consider capability and constraints because those shape what the actor can realistically do and what they will likely avoid. You use playbook thinking through TTP to recognize common sequences like initial access, privilege escalation, movement, and end goals. You remember that insiders and compromised accounts are part of the threat landscape, and that strategy should reduce opportunity for harm while enabling normal work. You also recognize that your controls and guardrails shape attacker behavior by raising cost, increasing detection risk, and reducing payoff, which influences what threat actors try next. When you practice this way of thinking, you become better at prioritizing protections that matter, explaining risk in business terms, and choosing strategies that are defensible under the GSTRT exam's decision-focused perspective.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.